Welcome to Ancient Wisdom. My name is Socrates, and tonight I am going to talk about a man who began it all. Thales of Miletus, the first among us to look at the world and say, "Let me understand, not believe." Thales lived long before my time, nearly 200 years before I took my first breath beneath the Athenian sky. Yet even now, I feel his presence as one feels the warmth of a hidden fire, faint but enduring. It was he who first dared to ask what the world was made of, not by turning to priests or poets, but by watching the sea, the sky, and the shape of his own reflection in the water. He was from Miletus, a city by the edge of the Ionian Sea. There, the wind from the east met the salt air of the Aegean, and the traders brought stories from Egypt, Babylon, and beyond. The markets of Miletus were full of motion, the creak of ships, the laughter of sailors, the scent of olives and honey. Yet amid that noise, Thales was known for his silence. He listened to the rhythm beneath things, to the steady pulse that runs through earth and air and living soul alike. In those days, people said the gods ruled all. If it rained, it was because Zeus wept. If thunder rolled, it was his anger. But Thales looked deeper. He saw that the world followed patterns, that the tides came and went in their time, that the moon pulled the water, that the stars moved with purpose. If the gods rule all, he thought, then perhaps their language is order. And so he began to listen to that order, not in fear but in wonder. He walked often to the shore at dusk. The sea stretched out before him, endless and shimmering, whispering secrets in its eternal motion. He watched how the water gave birth to clouds, how clouds turned to rain, and rain to rivers, and rivers again to sea. He saw that water was not only in rivers and storms, it was in the breath, the blood, the sap of trees. Everything lived because of it, and everything returned to it. And in that quiet rhythm, he heard an answer. Perhaps all is one, and that one is water. When I was young, I heard this tale and smiled. It seemed simple, even childlike, that all things come from water. But as I grew older, I came to see the depth behind that simplicity. It was not a claim of substance, but a revelation of unity. Thales had found in water a metaphor for all life, that what appears separate is bound by one essence, that what flows apart must someday return to its source. To know this is to begin philosophy. To know this is to rest the mind upon truth. So tonight, as we begin the story of Thales, let us not chase the noise of cleverness. Let us instead follow the flow of calm thought, as he once followed the tides of Miletus, and see where it carries us. For every wave that rises must fall, and every question that begins must end in stillness. Now close your eyes if you wish and listen. The night sea of Miletus calls us onward. It whispers of the first man who gazed upon the stars and said, "I will understand." And thus begins the age of wisdom. Long before I ever walked the streets of Athens, there was a time when the world was filled with voices, not of men but of gods. Every river had its spirit, every grove its guardian, and every fire its hunger. When thunder rolled across the sky, people bowed their heads and whispered prayers to unseen hands. They sought not to understand but to please. That was the age of belief, beautiful but bound in fear. And then, somewhere along the soft shores of Ionia, a quiet man began to wonder. He did not shout to the heavens or kneel before altars. He simply looked. He looked at the rising of the sun, at the curve of a shadow across a wall, at the way a bird circles before rain. He watched and he asked not, "Who caused this?" but, "What is this?" That question, small, calm, and profound, was the first spark of philosophy. They say Thales often sat by the harbor, where the ships of Miletus rocked gently upon the waves. The merchants passed him by, shaking their heads at his stillness. But he was listening to something they could not hear, the music of motion, the pattern beneath all change. To the people of his city, it must have seemed strange, even foolish. Yet the greatest truths are born from such quiet foolishness. He once said, "The world is full of questions, and each of them begins in wonder." How beautiful that is! Not in knowledge, but in wonder, the humble astonishment that opens the soul. It is the same feeling a child knows when he first looks at the stars, or when one sits at the edge of the sea and feels small but alive. It is the beginning of every wisdom worth having. Thales was the first among us to trust his own thought more than the tales of priests. He believed that the world could be known, that there was order hidden within the vastness of things. To him, truth was not a gift from Olympus but a treasure waiting beneath the surface of life, like gold hidden in sand. And so he began to dig. I often imagine him in the soft blue light of dawn, walking among the stones near the water's edge. The tide would creep around his feet, and the cries of the gulls would echo above. He would pause, looking toward the horizon where sea and sky became one. Perhaps he thought then, as I often have, that the beginning of all wisdom lies not in answers, but in questions that calm the heart. The people of Miletus must have found him curious, a man who sought no wealth, who spoke to no gods, who spent his days watching shadows and stars. But even in their laughter they respected him. For he was gentle, honest, and deeply kind. He had no temple, yet his life was prayer. No scripture, yet his silence was teaching. In those years, the world began to change quietly. Where once the poets sang of thunderbolts, men began to study the lightning itself. Where they once worshipped the river, they now measured its flow. Where they feared the eclipse, they began to predict it. And all of this, my friend, began with that single decision, to look rather than to bow. As I tell you this, I ask you to rest your thoughts once more. For Thales teaches us that wisdom is not about gathering truths, but about clearing space for them to appear. He teaches that life is filled with rhythm and reason, if only we are still enough to hear it. So let us walk beside him now, along the narrow paths of Miletus, where the scent of salt and olive fills the air, and the sun rises gold upon the sea. There, in that quiet beginning, the dawn of wonder shines again, soft, eternal, and waiting to be seen. There is something soothing about the sea at night. When the wind softens and the world grows still, the waves move like the breathing of the earth itself. Thales used to say that water is not just what we see, not only the sea, the river, or the rain, but the living essence of all that is. I remember the first time I heard that teaching. I was a boy then, sitting at the feet of an old philosopher in the agora, and he spoke Thales' name with reverence, as one might speak of a dawn long past. Thales, he said, was the first to look upon the world and see unity where others saw chaos. And I wondered what kind of mind could see the same substance flowing through stone, tree, and man alike. To Thales, water was not merely liquid, it was life itself, the source from which all things arise and to which all return. He watched the rain seep into the soil and call forth the green of the fields. He saw the river carve through stone, slow but sure, patient as thought. He saw the clouds drink the sea, wander the sky, and give birth to storms. And in each of these transformations he found a lesson, that what changes in form remains the same in essence. Think of that for a moment. All that we touch, all that we are, flowing, shifting, but never lost. The world, said Thales, is not a battlefield of separate things. It is a single vast movement, one water taking countless shapes. Even now, I find peace in that vision. For when we think of ourselves as separate, we suffer. We envy, we fear, we compete. But if we are made of the same essence, if all things share one source, then to harm another is to disturb our own current, and to bring calm to another is to soothe our own soul. Perhaps Thales saw this not as a doctrine, but as a kindness. He taught that the world was alive, and that life itself flowed like water, rising, falling, nourishing, eroding, returning. There is beauty in that circle, as there is in every cycle of nature. What the seed drinks, the leaf returns to the soil. What the body takes, the body gives back. The stream that feeds the fields becomes mist, then cloud, then rain again. In that endless rhythm, there is no death, only change of form, a continuation too gentle to be feared. Once, it is said, a student asked Thales, "If all is water, what then is soul?" And he replied, "The motion of all things." I have pondered that reply for years. Perhaps he meant that soul is the movement of life through matter, the unseen tide that animates each being. And perhaps he meant that the world itself has a soul, for it never stands still. It is always flowing, breathing, becoming. How soft that thought feels when one is weary, to know that we belong to something continuous. That when we are gone, the water of our being does not vanish. It returns to the source and rises again in another form, another wave, another life. So tonight, if your heart feels restless, imagine it as a pool of quiet water. Let the ripples of worry fade one by one until only stillness remains. That stillness is the wisdom of Thales. It is the knowing that beneath the noise and difference of things, there is one calm current moving through all. And when the wind touches it, it sings. They say Thales loved the night sky more than any treasure upon the earth. When others slept, he would walk out beyond the walls of Miletus, past the olive groves and the murmuring fields, until the hum of the city was only a memory. There, beneath the velvet darkness, he would lift his gaze upward, and lose himself among the stars. The people who saw him thought him strange. A man wandering alone, whispering to the heavens, tracing patterns with his hands in the air as though speaking to invisible companions. But I think Thales heard something that few others did, a silent harmony that bound the sky together. He knew that the stars were not scattered jewels placed by gods in play, but lights moving with a purpose. He believed that even the heavens followed order, and that to understand their rhythm was to glimpse the mind of the universe itself. There is a story told often, you may have heard it. One night, while watching the stars, Thales walked so deeply in thought that he fell into a well. A servant girl nearby laughed and said, "How can you know what is in the heavens when you cannot see what is at your feet?" Many retell this story with laughter, as if mocking the philosopher's absent mind. But to me there is quiet wisdom in it. For the thinker must live between two worlds, the earth beneath his feet and the infinite above. To reach for one, he must risk losing sight of the other. Yet both are necessary. The heavens give us meaning, the earth reminds us of measure. The wise man, like the tide, moves between them, touching the stars in thought, yet returning to ground in humility. I imagine Thales climbing out of that well, smiling gently, brushing the dust from his robe. Perhaps he said nothing. Perhaps he looked again to the sky, not embarrassed but amused, as though the world itself had given him a lesson. For what is wisdom if not the art of falling and rising again, with laughter instead of pride? He was among the first to study the constellations as signs of navigation. He taught sailors how to follow the course of the Little Bear to find their way home. He could predict the movement of stars and even the timing of eclipses. feats that made many whisper he possessed magic. But Thales needed no spells, only patience and clear sight. He showed that the universe does not hide its secrets, it simply speaks in silence. There is something deeply comforting in that. When the world feels uncertain, when the mind wanders in confusion, one can look up at the stars, the same lights Thales watched, and see their calm, unchanging order. They do not hurry, they do not boast, they simply move as they must. To see that is to remember that even in our smallest moments, we belong to something vast and steady. When I too have stood beneath the Athenian sky and watched the constellations wheel above, I have felt that same peace. It is the feeling that knowledge is not conquest but communion, not the seizing of truth but the quiet sharing of its presence. That, I believe, was the true gift of Thales. He taught us that wonder and humility can walk hand in hand, that one may gaze at the heavens and still love the earth. So when you next look at the night sky, remember the old man of Miletus who once fell into a well while seeking the stars. Smile as he must have smiled and think. Perhaps the greatest wisdom is not in reaching the heavens, but in finding heaven in the act of looking. Among the stories told of Thales, there is one that makes even the most practical of men pause and smile. The tale of the olive presses. You see, many mocked philosophers in his day. They said, "These thinkers speak of stars and shadows, but they cannot earn their bread. They know the heavens, yet not the price of grain." Thales heard such words often, but he did not answer them with argument. He waited, quietly, patiently, as a man waits for the ripening of fruit. One winter, after studying the sky and the movement of clouds, Thales predicted that the coming year would bring an abundant olive harvest. He said nothing of it to the farmers or the traders. Instead, when the season was cold and the presses were idle, he paid a small sum to reserve every olive press in Miletus and the neighboring towns. The people laughed, believing him a fool. But when spring came, the trees flowered thick with silver-green leaves and heavy fruit. The olives were so plentiful that the farmers rushed to press them, only to find that every press belonged to Thales. And so he rented them out at whatever price he wished, earning more gold in one season than most men earned in 10. When his friends came to congratulate him, he smiled and said, "You see, it is easy for philosophers to be rich, if they choose to." Then he gave away much of his profit and returned to his studies. There is deep wisdom in that act, though it may seem like a simple tale. Thales did not seek wealth nor despise it. He sought to prove a point, that wisdom is not useless, but that its worth lies beyond possession. He showed that understanding the patterns of nature could bring both peace and prosperity, if guided by moderation. He wanted the world to see that a wise man is not poor because he refuses to trade his soul for silver. To me, this story holds a quiet mirror. Many in Athens once accused me too of being poor, unpractical, a dreamer lost in questions. But I see now, as Thales did then, that to live simply is not to lack. It is to be free from the hunger that enslaves so many hearts. Thales' olive presses were not merely a clever trick. They were a lesson written in the language of life itself. He showed that a philosopher could understand the world well enough to profit from it, yet remain untouched by greed. That is the mark of true balance, to know the value of things without being owned by them. I often wonder what he felt that night, after the harvest was done and the presses grew quiet again. Perhaps he stood at the door of his small house, listening to the soft murmur of the sea. The air would have smelled of oil and earth. The people slept, and the moon hung above the harbor. Maybe he smiled, not for the gold he had earned, but for the calm that comes when one's understanding of the world turns into harmony with it. That is the true wealth of the philosopher, not coins but calm, not power but peace. And so, the story of Thales and the olive presses became more than a tale of fortune. It became a parable of purpose. He proved that wisdom, though it may live in quiet minds, can shape the world just as strongly as the hands of kings. Let us remember that as we rest tonight, that the knowledge we hold is not to boast, nor to gather riches, but to live gently and in tune with the greater rhythm that sustains all things. The sound of the olive press fades, and once again, Thales turns his gaze to the stars, for even in success, his heart belongs to wonder. The years passed, and the name of Thales spread through Ionia. Merchants spoke of his cleverness, sailors of his knowledge of the stars, and farmers of his gift for prediction. Yet, for all the praise that followed him, he lived as he always had, quietly, simply, with little more than a cloak, a staff, and a mind at peace. He owned no fine home, no servants, no banquet hall. His house was bare but filled with light. A small garden grew behind it, watered by a stream that flowed down from the hills, and in the evenings he would sit there with a cup of water and bread, content. Those who visited him wondered how a man so wise could live with so little. He would only smile and say, "A man who desires nothing lacks nothing." That was the heart of his wisdom, not in words alone, but in the way he lived. For Thales saw that to know the world was to walk in rhythm with it. He believed that every excess was a kind of blindness, that the more a man seeks to possess, the less he can see. To him, the stars were clearer when the lamps were dimmed, and truth was simplest when life was light. I have always admired this, for simplicity is a kind of courage. It is not easy to live without the armor of possessions or the noise of praise. To walk the earth with a quiet soul requires strength, the strength to be satisfied with what is enough. Thales once said to a visitor from Lydia, "I have discovered what makes the mind light, to need less." The man asked, "But does not the wise man deserve comfort?" Thales answered, "He already has it, for he is content with what he has." It was this balance, between knowing and needing, that made Thales the first philosopher in more than name. He taught by example that wisdom is not found in temples or scrolls, but in how we live each ordinary day. A quiet meal eaten with gratitude is greater than a feast taken with pride. A clear conscience brings deeper sleep than a bed of gold, and a calm mind is the richest possession a man can own. At times, when I walked through the crowded markets of Athens, I would think of Thales. I would see men chasing fortune, arguing, shouting over coins, and I would imagine the philosopher of Miletus walking through them, untouched by their fever. He would look at them kindly perhaps, but keep his steps slow, as if to remind them that there is another way to live, one guided not by gain but by grace. His simplicity was not poverty, it was harmony. He needed little because he had much within himself. His joy came not from things, but from the act of understanding, from seeing the beauty of order in the stars, the quiet reason in the tides, and the purpose even in change. When people asked him why he spent so much time alone, he would answer, "Because I am never alone when I am thinking." There is great tenderness in that reply. For to think deeply is to be in conversation with the universe, and in that conversation one finds companionship more faithful than any crowd. So, if you find yourself restless tonight, if your mind runs after worries, or your heart after what it does not have, remember Thales of Miletus, who owned almost nothing yet felt he lacked nothing. Let your thoughts rest where his once rested, upon the quiet truth that simplicity is not emptiness but peace. The world, when seen with calm eyes, asks for very little. Just a breath, a thought, and gratitude for being. And in that moment, as the stars turn softly above, the soul becomes light again, as it did in Miletus beneath the gaze of the first philosopher. Thales believed that the truest teacher was not man but nature herself. He would say, to understand the world, one must watch it, not command it. So he listened to rivers, to winds, to the movement of clouds, as though each were an old friend whispering secrets that words could not carry. In the mornings, he would walk beyond the walls of Miletus, where the land met the sea in long, gentle curves. There he found his classroom. The waves rose and fell with patience. The reeds bent but did not break. The gulls wheeled above without fear. All of it, he thought, was a reflection of truth, the same truth that lived within the human heart. He watched how water flowed around obstacles, never fighting, never forcing, and yet always reaching its destination. And he would say, be like water. Yield, but do not yield up your essence. He saw that when the river met a stone, it did not stop. It shaped the stone instead, slowly, kindly, with time as its ally. From this, he learned that gentleness is stronger than violence, and that what endures is not what resists, but what adapts. When storms came and the sky thundered, Thales did not hide. He would stand upon the shore, robes whipping in the wind, and watch the fury of the elements. Even this, he said once, is wisdom, the strength that comes from motion, the calm that follows it. He understood that destruction too is part of creation, that the storm clears the air for new light to fall. How few of us remember that in the tempests of our own hearts. He learned from the trees too, how they rooted deeply and reached upward at once. He said, a man must have both, the earth to hold him and the sky to guide him. From fire he learned warmth and danger, from the wind, freedom and restlessness. Every element held a mirror to the soul. To Thales, nothing in nature was silent, everything spoke. Only those who rushed through life failed to hear. Once, a young student came to him eager to learn. He asked, Master, how can I know truth as you do? Thales replied, go and sit by a river. Watch until you understand why it moves. The student went away puzzled. But after many days by the riverbank, he returned with tears in his eyes. It moves because it cannot stay still, he said. Thales smiled. And now you understand the soul. That was his way, not of teaching by command but by awakening perception. He did not lecture about virtue. He showed it in the rhythm of the world. He did not preach peace. He revealed it in the quiet of the tides. When I reflect upon his method, I see how close it is to the life I try to live. To ask, to listen, to learn from what simply is. For the truth does not hide in temples or scrolls. It lives in the heartbeat of all things. The rustle of leaves, the hum of bees, the silence after rain. Each is a syllable in the language of being. Tonight, as you listen, let nature speak to you as it spoke to Thales. Perhaps it is the whisper of wind at your window, or the soft rhythm of your breath. Let these sounds remind you that you too are part of that vast and patient order. You are not apart from the world, you are within it, flowing as it flows, resting as it rests. And when your mind grows still enough, you may feel what Thales felt beside the sea. That beneath the noise of existence lies a single, endless calm. It is the peace of nature, the peace of understanding. It is the wisdom that needs no words. There came a time, quiet but radiant, when the way men looked upon the world began to change forever. Before Thales, every answer came wrapped in a story. Thunder was Zeus, the sea was Poseidon, the harvest was Demeter's gift. Men lived by tales, and tales gave comfort. But Thales looked around and saw that beneath those stories there was order, a pattern, gentle and patient, waiting to be seen. He was not a destroyer of faith, he was a seeker of understanding. He did not say, "There are no gods." He said, "Perhaps the gods speak through the harmony of nature itself." It was this thought, humble and daring, that opened the door to all that came after. For the first time, man began to believe that truth could be discovered through reason, not revelation. Imagine that moment, the world illuminated not by flame but by thought. A fisherman watching the tides, a farmer studying the seasons, a philosopher tracing the paths of stars, each finding not superstition but structure. And in that quiet shift, Greece was reborn. I often think of Thales standing at the boundary of two worlds, one of myth, the other of mind. He did not shout across the divide. He built a bridge of observation, one stone at a time, until others could follow. From his question, "What is the world made of?" flowed all the questions that would shape our age. What is justice? What is virtue? What is the soul? It all began with that first act of courage, the courage to wonder without fear. In Miletus, his students gathered, men like Anaximander and Anaximenes, and together they began to unravel the fabric of creation, not with hymns but with hypotheses. The world became their temple, thought became their prayer. And though their answers differed, their purpose was one: to seek the unity beneath the seeming chaos of life. The poets sang of heroes who fought monsters. The philosophers began to face monsters of the mind, ignorance, confusion, illusion. Their weapons were questions, their victories were moments of clarity. And from this, philosophy was born, not as a doctrine but as a way of seeing. Thales did not live to see how vast his seed of thought would grow. He could not know that, centuries later, I would walk the same path through the agora, asking the same questions in different words. Yet I owe him much, for he gave us the courage to believe that reason and wonder can live together, that the mind can be a lamp, not a cage. When I spoke to the young men of Athens, I often told them, "Do not think that wisdom began with me or my companions. It began with one man who watched the sea and saw the eternal in the changing." It is strange how quietly great revolutions begin. No trumpet, no war, no throne overturned, only a man watching the water, thinking. And yet that thought rippled through centuries, reaching every mind that ever dared to ask why. So tonight, as you rest and breathe, remember that you live in the light that Thales first lit. Every time you pause to wonder at the stars, every time you question what seems obvious, you continue his work. For the true birth of Greek thought was not a moment in time, it is a movement that still flows through every mind that seeks to understand. And in that endless river of reflection, Thales still walks, calm, silent, and smiling beneath the same ancient sky. There was one belief of Thales that puzzled many, even his own students. He said, "Everything is full of gods." Some thought he spoke in riddles. Others mocked him, saying he had returned to myth after all his reason. But I have come to think he meant something far deeper, something that rests quietly between logic and reverence. When Thales looked at the world, he did not see lifeless matter. He saw motion. He saw transformation. He saw the pulse of existence, how stone, air, fire, and water were never still, always becoming, always alive. To him, this constant motion was not chaos. it was the breath of the divine. And so, when he said that all things are full of gods, perhaps he was not speaking of figures with faces and tempers, but of the spirit that moves through everything. The spark that makes the seed open, that drives the fish through the sea, that draws the stars along their courses. To Thales, that was the divine, not above the world, but within it. Even now, when I walk among the olive trees and hear the wind move through their leaves, I feel what he must have felt. A sense that the world is not made of dead things, but of living presence. That even silence has a voice, and even the smallest stone has its purpose. Thales once dropped a piece of amber and noticed that, when rubbed, it attracted small bits of straw. He was astonished. He thought, perhaps there is spirit even in this stone, a hidden energy that draws other things to it. From such moments came the birth of science, but also a whisper of sacredness, that the world is alive with unseen forces, waiting to be understood. In that way, he was both a scientist and a mystic, a bridge between mind and mystery. He showed that to study the world does not strip it of meaning. It reveals meaning more deeply. The philosopher's gaze is not cold, it is compassionate. It looks at the universe and says, "You are not beneath me, you are part of me." When I think of his words, "Everything is full of gods," I feel peace. For it reminds me that even in despair, the world around us is not empty. There is movement, growth, renewal, the quiet labor of existence that never ceases. The same essence that flows in rivers flows in us. The same fire that shines in the stars burns gently behind our eyes. Perhaps Thales wanted us to see that life is not divided between sacred and ordinary. There is no place without spirit, no moment without meaning. The divine is not distant. It is the pulse within every breath, the stillness between every thought. So, when you next look upon the world, a leaf trembling in the breeze, a drop of rain upon glass, a shadow sliding across the floor, see it as Thales saw it, alive, aware, filled with quiet intelligence. Feel, as he did, the tenderness of being surrounded by a universe that listens as much as it speaks. He taught that wisdom begins when we stop treating the world as an object and start meeting it as a companion. When we stop saying it and begin to say thou, that is the soul of all things, the unbroken connection between ourselves and the whole. And in that truth we find the softest kind of divinity, one that does not demand worship, only understanding. One that does not dwell in temples, but in the quiet awareness that everything everywhere is alive. If you were to walk the streets of Miletus in the days of Thales, you would hear the hum of a city both ancient and young, a place where ideas moved as freely as the wind off the sea. The harbor open to the wide Aegean, its waters sparkling like polished glass beneath the sun. Ships from Egypt, Lydia, and distant Phoenicia drifted in and out, their sails swollen with trade and story. The air smelled of salt, figs, and oil. And amid all that bustle, there lived a man who saw in every sound and shimmer a lesson from the universe. Miletus was no silent wilderness. It was alive, the perfect cradle for a mind like Thales. Its streets twisted like thought itself, lined with merchants calling out their wares, bright cloth from Tyre, jars of honey, bronze mirrors that caught the sun. But Thales walked through it all with the stillness of a man who listens more than he speaks. Where others heard noise, he heard rhythm. Where others saw trade, he saw exchange, not just of goods, but of ideas, the lifeblood of civilization. At the edge of the city, the sea murmured against the docks. Thales would sit there in the evenings, his feet bare upon the worn planks, his eyes resting on the horizon where the light bled into the waves. To him, the city was part of the cosmos, a reflection of the harmony he saw everywhere. Its walls were like the veins of a leaf, its people like the tides, moving in and out, each carrying purpose. Sometimes children followed him, curious at his silence, his faraway gaze. He would smile and kneel beside them, drawing figures in the dust, circles, triangles, stars. He would ask them what they saw, and when they answered, he would gently turn their eyes upward. "Look again," he would say. "You are made of the same stuff as the heavens. To know yourself, you must learn to see the world." And so, even the children of Miletus learned to wonder. Perhaps that is why his city birthed so many thinkers after him, for Thales had sown the seed of curiosity in its soil. His way of seeing changed the air itself, and in that air grew minds unafraid to question, to doubt, to dream. In the stillness of night, when the torches dimmed and only the stars kept vigil, the city would seem to breathe. The sound of the waves against the harbor walls became the pulse of life itself. It is easy to imagine Thales then, walking along the quiet streets, his robe brushing against the stones, the moonlight gliding across his path. No one disturbed him, for all knew his habits. The gentle philosopher who spoke to the stars and returned each dawn with thoughts that no merchant could measure. He loved Miletus not for its riches, but for its openness. Here, the voices of many lands mingled. Here, thought was not chained to one god or one king. It was a city where freedom had taken root, freedom of trade, of speech, of mind. And in that freedom, philosophy found its first home. When I think of Miletus, I think of balance, the hum of life and the calm of reflection side by side. A place where the philosopher and the fisherman shared the same sunrise, where the same sea that carried ships also carried thoughts beyond the horizon. That, I think, is why wisdom was born there. Because Thales did not flee the world to find truth, he found truth within the world. In the marketplace, in the river, in the stars above the roofs of his city. He showed that philosophy is not escape, it is awakening. And that even in the busiest harbor, one can hear the quiet voice of the cosmos, if only one listens. So tonight, as you lie still and breathe, imagine Miletus at dusk, the scent of the sea, the glow of oil lamps in narrow streets, and an old man walking slowly home, the stars rising above him like questions waiting to be answered. He pauses, looks up, and smiles, for even in that small city he has seen the pattern of the infinite. It is said that to walk beside Thales was to learn without realizing it. He never demanded attention, never raised his voice, yet the world seemed to grow clearer in his presence. He taught not through speeches, but through silence, through the quiet act of seeing. He would take his students outside the city, beyond the markets, the chatter, the smoke, to where the hills rolled gently toward the sea. There he would stop and simply observe. He would look at a tree and ask, "What do you see?" When the students answered, "Leaves, trunk, shadow," he would nod and say, "Look again." They would look again and again, until one of them noticed how the tree reached upward and yet drew its strength from the ground. Then Thales would smile as if a truth had been born. To him, observation was not about collecting facts, it was about awakening awareness. He taught that wisdom begins when one learns to see what has always been there. He would say, "The eyes of the body see objects, the eyes of the soul see patterns." Once, while walking with a young student, Thales stopped by a small stream. He stooped, lifted a handful of water, and let it fall through his fingers. "Tell me," he said, "what do you see?" The boy answered, "Water moving." Thales nodded. "And when it moves no more?" "It is gone." "Ah, said Thales softly, but it has not vanished, it has only changed its form. He pointed to the clouds above them, to the mist rising from the stream. What you hold is never lost, he said. It only becomes something else. That was his way, to teach the eternal within the fleeting. His lessons were like the wind, invisible yet shaping everything they touched. He did not demand belief, he invited wonder. He wanted his students to look at the sky, not for signs of gods or omens, but for the beauty of order, how each star kept to its path, how the heavens moved as one great thought. When the day ended, they would sit together as the sun bled gold across the horizon. He would draw lines in the sand, the angles of shadows, the curve of the moon's rising, and show how numbers like nature held balance in music. He said, "To measure is to listen to the universe's heartbeat." Many of his students would go on to become thinkers themselves, but few could explain what exactly he had taught them, only that the world looked different after meeting him. The same sky, the same river, the same fields, yet all somehow more alive, more meaningful. It was as though Thales had given them not knowledge, but new eyes. Sometimes I wonder if all true teaching is like that. Not the giving of answers, but the awakening of sight. For knowledge imposed is easily forgotten, but knowledge discovered becomes part of one's soul. I imagine sitting beside him in that Ionian light, the wind playing through the grass. He would speak little, perhaps just enough to stir a thought, then fall silent again, letting nature finish the lesson. There was no rush, no test, no fear of failure, only the slow unfolding of understanding like dawn across the sea. That is why I call Thales the first teacher of philosophy, not because he explained the world, but because he taught how to see it. He did not fill minds, he opened them. And those who truly saw through his eyes could never again pass a river or a star or a stone without feeling that they too were part of something infinite. So as you rest tonight, you may try his way. Let your eyes wander softly across your room, across the night beyond your window. See not only the shape of things, but the space between them, the stillness that holds them all together. For in that space, Thales would say, wisdom begins. And in that silence, perhaps he still teaches. There is an old tale that Thales once journeyed to Egypt, a land where the desert met the sky in golden stillness, where the Nile gave life to both soil and spirit. He had gone there not for conquest or riches, but for curiosity, drawn by stories of their wisdom, their geometry, their monuments that seemed to touch eternity. When he arrived, the priests of Heliopolis greeted him with polite amusement. They had heard of this Greek who claimed to understand the heavens and the tides, and they wondered what such a man could learn among their stones. But Thales was not proud. He listened. He watched. He learned from every grain of sand, every line of the horizon. One day while walking near the Great Pyramids, he stopped. The afternoon sun hung low, and the shadows stretched long across the ground. The priests gathered around him, curious as he drove his staff into the sand and waited. When the shadow of his staff matched its height, he smiled. "Now," he said gently, "the shadow of the pyramid is equal to its height. By comparing the two, I can know the measure of your great monument." And so, without ropes or scaffolds, without scaling its vast sides, Thales measured what the Egyptians had built with their centuries of toil. Not through strength, but through thought. Not by touching the stones, but by understanding the sun. The priests marveled, and word of this moment spread. For in that instant they saw something new, that the human mind could weigh the world with reason, that the eye of understanding could pierce even the highest mysteries. Thales did not boast. He looked up at the pyramid, its peak glinting like flame in the light, and whispered, "The gods made the world, I only measured its shadow." Then he turned away, for he cared more for the truth itself than the praise it brought. I often think of that moment when the light met the stone and mind met matter. It was not just a lesson in geometry, it was the dawn of a new kind of reverence. Thales showed that to measure the world is not to diminish it. To understand its order is to love it more deeply. He once said that time is the wisest thing, for it reveals all. And in Egypt, surrounded by monuments built to outlast generations, he learned what time truly meant. He saw that human life is brief, but thought endures. The pyramid stands for kings. The idea stands for mankind. Perhaps that is why he returned to Greece not as a student, but as a messenger. He carried no gold, no scrolls, no treasures of the Nile, only what he had seen. That knowledge is not the privilege of the few, but the destiny of all who dare to look closely. When he came back to Miletus, he would often tell his pupils about that desert light, how the smallest stick could reveal the measure of the greatest mountain. He taught that the same order shaping the heavens also shapes the earth, and the same reason that measures the shadow can measure the soul. And I too have pondered this in my own way, how every truth of the mind reflects a truth of the spirit, how the geometry of the world mirrors the geometry of the heart. Balance, proportion, harmony. To live wisely is to live in measure as Thales did. Not too much, not too little. Neither in pride nor in fear, but in quiet awareness of where the light falls and where the shadow begins. So, as the night deepens and shadows stretch across your room, think of Thales in the golden sand, watching the sun move slowly, patiently, until the measure revealed itself. He did not rush, for he knew that truth comes to those who wait with stillness. And perhaps if you close your eyes, you may see him standing there, a solitary figure in the vastness, smiling as the desert wind moves through his robe. The first man to measure the eternal with nothing but thought and time. Thales was the first among us to see that the language of nature is written in number and shape. He found harmony in lines, mystery in angles, and eternity in circles. When he drew upon the sand, it was not art, it was revelation. He would kneel beside his students, tracing a single circle with his staff. "Behold," he would whisper, "the simplest of all forms, and the most perfect." For in the circle he saw the essence of the universe. No beginning, no end, only the endless return of what was, what is, and what will be. He discovered that a circle is bisected by its diameter, that within its symmetry lies proportion, equality, and truth. To others it was a clever trick. To Thales, it was divine music captured in shape. He believed geometry was not born of human invention, but of human remembrance, that we rediscover what the cosmos already knows. I imagine him by the sea, his staff scratching lines into the wet sand as the tide crept closer. He would draw triangles, measure shadows, and mark distances by the movement of the stars. He did not calculate for conquest, nor measure for power. He measured to understand. And perhaps as the tide washed away his work, he smiled, for he knew that truth need not remain written. It endures in the pattern of things. The circle, to him, was more than geometry. It was a symbol of being. He saw that everything in life moves in cycles. Day and night, birth and death, fullness and decline, questions and answers. He would say, "There is no straight line in nature. All things bend toward return." How peaceful that thought is, that nothing is lost, only transformed, that every ending is merely the turning of the wheel. When I was young, I believed wisdom to be a staircase, Each step a new truth, each height a victory over ignorance. But as I have grown old, I see that it is not a climb at all, but a circle. We return again and again to the same questions, only seeing them with gentler eyes. And in that endless turning, we learn patience, humility, and peace. Thales, I think, saw this before any of us. He once told a pupil, "The gods love circles, for they remind man of eternity." The pupil asked, "And what of the straight line?" Thales smiled and said, "It is for those who wish to hurry." He laughed softly, for he knew that nature hurries not. Even the stars, in their grandeur, move slowly across the heavens, completing their circles with silent grace. Perhaps that is why his thoughts have endured for centuries. They move like the circle itself, never ending, always returning, quietly influencing the minds that come after. The mathematicians who drew their proofs, the philosophers who sought perfection, the artists who painted balance, all have touched the same idea that Thales traced in the sand so long ago. Sometimes when I gaze upon the moon, round and luminous above Athens, I think of him. He must have watched it rise above Miletus and seen in its shape the reflection of his own heart, calm, eternal, complete. To him, the moon was not merely a light. It was a symbol of order in a restless world, the visible sign that even the infinite can be measured by rhythm. And so, his circles became our inheritance, reminders that wisdom is not found in reaching beyond, but in returning within. That the universe, vast and mysterious, is mirrored in the smallest curve drawn by a human hand. So, as this night deepens and your breathing slows, imagine Thales drawing his final circle under the stars. The sand smooth, the sea whispering near, and his hand steady as he completes the line that joins beginning to end. Then quietly he sets his staff aside and watches the tide erase it. He smiles, for he knows the truth cannot be erased. It lives wherever things move and return and begin again. The circle closes, and in its center rests the infinite. Time, like water, carries all things forward. Yet some names remain, floating upon its surface, unbroken by the centuries. Thales is one of those names. Not because he built temples or commanded armies, but because he did something far rarer. He taught men to think for themselves. Before him, the world was explained through stories of gods and giants. After him, men began to ask questions, not of priests but of nature itself. He taught us that wisdom is not granted from above but discovered from within. That truth is not a decree but a dialogue between the mind and the world. When I was a younger man, I often stood beneath the sky of Athens and wondered how this path began. Who first dared to doubt? Who first believed that the stars could be understood without worship? And every time I found my answer in Thales. He was the first to trust reason, the gentle flame that lights the darkness of ignorance. He left no scrolls, no grand doctrines. Yet his influence flows through every mind that has ever asked why. He taught Anaximander, who spoke of the boundless, the Epeiron, as the source of all things. Anaximenes followed, teaching that air itself was the breath of life. And so began the long lineage of thinkers who shaped our world. Pythagoras, Heraclitus, Plato, and, in time, myself. All of us walked paths that began in Miletus, where Thales once gazed at the sea and saw the infinite reflected in its rippling face. He gave us the first glimpse of philosophy, not as doctrine but as love of wisdom. It was he who turned the human gaze inward, to see that the same harmony ruling the cosmos also stirs within the human heart. That to know the world, one must first become still enough to listen to it. When I reflect upon his life, I do not see him as an old man of theories and numbers, but as a gentle soul walking between worlds, between the seen and the unseen, between myth and mind. He lived without pride, and yet his humility changed the course of human thought. He did not conquer the earth, yet he conquered confusion. He did not demand faith, yet he inspired trust in the quiet order of existence. The legacy of Thales is not one of temples or power, but of awakening. Because of him, we no longer tremble before the storm, we listen to it. We no longer pray for the sun to rise, we understand why it does. He freed the human spirit from fear by replacing mystery with wonder, superstition with curiosity. And yet, even as he lifted reason into the light, he never lost reverence. He saw the sacred not as something separate from the world, but as the world itself, alive, ordered, flowing. That is why I have always felt kinship with him. For though we lived centuries apart, we both sought not to own wisdom, but to dwell beside it as one dwells beside the sea. He died, they say, while watching a festival of the games. He was old then and the sun was bright. Some say he fell asleep in peace and never awoke. I like to think that even in that final breath, his eyes were lifted, perhaps toward the horizon or the movement of a cloud, or the simple wonder of a child laughing in the crowd. He left the world as he lived in it, quietly observing, content. And the waves of his thoughts still move, still reach the shores of every age. For the river of philosophy, like all rivers, remembers its source. And its source was Thales, the man who taught us to see. So as you listen now, as the night deepens and the stars emerge one by one, remember him not as a figure of history, but as a friend of the mind, a gentle guide who reminds us that the greatest wisdom begins with a single moment of wonder. When you next look at water or stars or the calm rhythm of your own breath, know that you are part of his legacy. For in your quiet curiosity, his spirit still speaks, and in that stillness, wisdom lives on. Now the story draws to its close, like the tide returning softly to the sea. And as I sit here, speaking to you beneath the same ancient sky that once watched over Thales, I feel his spirit near, calm, patient, unhurried. He began with water, and so shall we end with it. He believed that all things come from water, that within its depths lies the origin of life and the mirror of truth. But he did not mean only the water that fills rivers and seas. He meant the stillness beneath all motion, the silent essence that connects all things. When I think of his vision, I see a pool at dawn. Its surface is smooth as glass, reflecting both the heavens above and the earth below. If one stirs it, the reflection breaks, yet the sky remains unbroken. So too with the soul. When our thoughts are troubled, truth seems far away, but in stillness, it returns clear and whole. Thales, I think, understood that peace is not found in retreating from the world, but in seeing it rightly. He did not hide from noise, he listened through it. He did not flee from change, he recognized its rhythm. He did not seek perfection in another realm, but in the quiet harmony of this one. That is why his teaching endures, not as doctrine but as feeling. It is the feeling of watching the sea without needing to control its waves. It is the breath that deepens when we realize we are part of something vast and kind. It is the moment we stop asking the world to be simple and begin to see that simplicity has always been its nature. He showed us that the same calm found in water can be found within ourselves. That beneath our restless surface, beneath our thoughts, our fears, our endless motion, there is something steady, ancient, and pure. A still water that does not change when the wind rises or the sky darkens. It is always there, waiting for us to notice. If you wish, you may close your eyes now and imagine it. a quiet sea beneath your thoughts. Each worry a ripple fading into peace. Each breath a wave returning home. You do not need to hold this peace, it holds you. This, I believe, is the true gift Thales left us. The knowledge that the world outside and the world within follow the same law. Both are alive, both are connected, both can be known through calm observation. When we understand this, we no longer feel apart from life. We flow with it. We no longer fear change, we recognize it as the dance of being. We no longer chase truth, we rest in it as a leaf rests upon a stream. And so, as the night deepens and the stars keep their silent watch, let us end where we began, with stillness. Let your mind grow quiet, as Thales must have been when he stood beside the Sea of Miletus. Hear the soft rhythm of your own breathing, like waves upon the shore. Feel the peace of knowing that you, too, are made of the same essence that moves the rivers and turns the stars. For all things, my friend, flow from one source, and to that source they will return. And in that eternal movement there is no fear, only peace. That is what Thales saw, what he lived, and what he left behind. May his wisdom be like the calm tide in your heart, rising, falling, but never ceasing. May his stillness be your own. And when you sleep tonight, may your dreams drift gently upon that same ancient water, forever reflecting the quiet light of truth. Good night, my friend, and may wisdom watch over your rest.